Welcome back to another episode of Flawless Plan Garage. And today we're doing something a little different. We're going to do a bit of an intro and a buyer's guide for the Chevrolet Corvair. Now, the Corvair was a huge departure for General Motors. It was sold alongside traditional, big body-on-frame, rear-wheel drive vehicles like Impalas. But not only was it positioned as kind of an import fighter, but for GM, it was really a test bed and a way to try and experiment with and learn about a bunch of new innovative technologies and manufacturing methods. It was a unibody car, so no body on frame, which was new for GM at the time. It was fully independent suspension, which was very new at this price point for GM at the time, something that might have only previously existed at the rarefied air of the Corvette level. A rear engine that was air-cooled and, even more importantly, primarily made from aluminum, which required GM to learn and develop a lot of new manufacturing techniques to deal with aluminum engines. All of these combined to make a really interesting, really unique vehicle that gave a very unique driving experience for a 1960s domestic vehicle. Even though they've got drum brakes all the way around, those were stolen from the big car parts bin at GM, so they stop exceptionally well. And with the lightweight unibody construction, the four-wheel independent suspension, good brakes, lightweight steering because the engine and all the weight is in the back, even without power assist, you've got a car that handles, stops, turns, brakes like nothing else domestic manufacturers were making in the 1960s. Because if you haven't driven a stock 60s Impala or even some muscle cars in their original configuration, they kind of drive like trucks, and not like new good trucks, like trucks from the 80s that are pretty worn out. And the reason for that is really because if you look at the way they're built, they kind of are trucks from the 1980s that are worn out. Live axles, leaf springs in a lot of cases, frames that are not terribly rigid, drum brakes that are undersized for the vehicle, and suspension geometry that they just do not like to stop or turn or do anything but make really cool noises and accelerate in a straight line. And that was part of why the Corvair was such a huge departure. So if it's something you're interested in, if it's something that appeals to you, you'll find that the driving experience on a Corvair is much more modern and sophisticated than most of the domestic stuff you'd find in the 60s, while still being kind of classic and kind of fun and kind of unique, and compared to modern vehicles, very engaging as well. Now, GM built almost 2 million Corvairs in various forms over the course of the run from 1960 to 69. So they're not, most of them are really not rare in the sense of most classic cars. And values have risen some in the last few years for sure, but overall, these are very affordable, very attainable, a very easy way to kind of get into the classic car experience if that's something that you're looking for. And they came in a variety of different body styles and trim levels. So what we have here is a late model, 1965 through 69 coupe. So the early model was 1960 to 64. You'll see those called the EM in Corvair lingo. The late model was 1965 through 69 in this body style that you see here. There were also trucks and vans, and we'll do a separate video on those. Those are often called the FC for forward control for the layout of those trucks and vans. But what we're going to focus on today is the LM, the late model, the 65 through 69 cars, which came in coupe, convertible, and sedan body styles, but really mechanically very similar across the range. Body structure and everything else that we'll talk about and take a look at today, very similar across the range. So pretty much everything we'll talk about applies, whether you're looking at a coupe, convertible, or sedan. Now, the big redesign for the quote-unquote late model Corvair in 1965 was significant. They changed a lot about the vehicle, but probably most significant was the rear suspension design, which went to a fully independent rear axle instead of the swing axle design from the early models. And this represented not only a great performance improvement, specifically because you got much better control of the camber curve of the wheel through the suspension travel, but also eliminated any possibility of axle jacking, it's called, where with a swing axle car, if you were to go over seriously uneven terrain, because that wheel has to pivot on an arc because of the axle, you could potentially, if you got into a bad situation, end up kind of folding the tire and the axle under the vehicle, which then kind of jacks the thing up and can cause the car to roll roll over. Now, as Hagerty and others have found in their testing, there's really nothing inherently unsafe about the Corvair, even with swing axle rear suspension. But like a Volkswagen, like other swing axle vehicles, there are inherent disadvantages to that rear suspension design. And the late models did away with that and went to something that looks very much like a 60s Corvette for the rear suspension. They also came in several trim levels. The 500 model was kind of your base entry level, typically, devoid of very many options, often found with vinyl floors, etc. Not very many gauges on the dashboard. Those are kind of the base model Corvairs. Then you had the Monza, kind of your mid-trim level, which is available with more options and some different, more powerful engines, some more interior options. And the top of the line in the late model is the Corsa, like this one we have here. The Corsa was the sportiest and the most powerful of the range, available with some of the top engine options like the 140 horsepower, 4 individual one-barrel carburetor equipped engine, and a 180 horsepower turbocharged engine. Now, the Corvair in 1962 was one of the first couple, very first couple of production turbocharged vehicles available in the market. And that carried through into the late model car, with then uprated with a new turbocharger, some more displacement, different carburetor, etc. Many small differences in those motors, but the engines in the late models made 180 horsepower. The turbo models come with their own specific challenges that we won't probably cover today, but the 140s and the 110 horsepower engines that you'll commonly find in late models are very straightforward engines and very simple to deal with no cooling system to have to worry about from a water standpoint. Generally very durable as well, though they do have a few basic, simple upgrades you can do that make them even more, simple, easy to deal with in modern times and reliable. The base model engine that you might find in a late model car would be the 95 horsepower engine, which doesn't rev out. It's got a less aggressive camshaft, tuned more for torque. Those are actually popular among some Corvair aficionados in their own right because they drive smooth, they make good torque down low, and again, they're typically very durable over the long haul. That being said, if you're looking at a Corvair and you're looking at one that does need significant engine overhaul, it is expensive now. The parts are readily available through a number of nationwide suppliers, the biggest of which certainly is Clark's Corvair Parts out of Massachusetts. You can get just about anything you would need from them. They've been a great company for me to be a customer of over the years. But there's a lot of parts in a Corvair engine, and obviously the volumes of Corvair parts are a tiny fraction of what you would have with a Chevy small block or something more common. So it's a much more expensive proposition to rebuild a Corvair engine. It's easy to spend $3,000 or $4,000 just on the parts, and of course any engine rebuild will involve machine work, some of which is a little bit specialized for the Corvair. So it's easy to drop $5,000 plus overhauling an engine, probably more like upwards of that number if you've got significant work or significant parts replacement that needs to happen. That being said, if you've got a good motor that doesn't burn a lot of oil, that doesn't make a lot of terrible sounds, they tend to just be pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and last a long time. They're all old cars at this point. They're all 60 plus years old now, approximately. But as far as engines go, they've got relatively few catastrophic failure points.
Now let's get this car up on the lift and take a closer look at it. Chris Schade has been a friend and a brother in Christ for over 25 years now, and he has the honor, at least the dubious distinction, of owning what I like to call the world's only Corvair dealership, Shade's Classic Cars in Hastings, Nebraska.
Okay, so we're going to look at some of the areas down low on the body and underneath the body on these late model cars. And the example that we've got up on the rack today actually belongs to Greg King, known to his friends as the fastest man in Missouri. He's got this beautiful late model that has a bunch of modifications on it. So you'll notice if you happen to look, a lot of the suspension components are modified for track use or really fun street driving. But the body here is generally original and pretty straightforward. So we'll focus on those aspects. So Chris, when you're looking at a late model, whether it's a coupe or sedan, what are you looking for on the lower part of the body as far as rust issues and body issues?
You bet. Well, first thing I look at down here on the lower portion of the car, there are stress seams in every corner of the car. And so what you'll often see, this is a common rust area right here. Clark's does reproduce this part and it's a patch panel. Very common to rust here. What happens often is people will Bondo them up and they'll smooth the Bondo around the corner, and if there's no stress seam there, you know there's a whole bunch of Bondo. So we'll look at the back of the car too, but that's a common rust area. Stress seam we'll check out. When we move back here, the dog leg on late models, super common. Clark's again makes a patch panel here. But this is very common to rust out, so we often replace many of those.
And largely because the windshield area drains, like the water drain actually comes down there into the fender. So are there plugs down here or ways to clean this out or keep this from rusting if you own one already?
Right. Well, and we'll talk on the top of the car too, the bottom of the windshield rust areas too. But so I know for certainly in the rockers there's venting, if you will, and there are holes that allow air to flow. But over time, dust and dirt and whatnot collects, and they plug those holes up. So obviously, they'll fill up and they'll rust from the inside out. As far as in the dog leg goes, I don't personally know of an example of what's going through there exactly as far as a channel. I do know in the rockers there is those opening ports, and so you will see they may look solid on the outside, often the rockers here, but they are rusting from the inside out. So if you're seeing stuff on the outside, you know the inside is gone. And so that's important to look down. On the corner of the doors too is very common to rust, right here in this section on both sides. And then if we go towards the back of the car, this is a very common, another patch panel you can get, a rust area. On the passenger side, obviously the battery tray is above it, and that's a common rust area. But even on this side, these are common rust areas. And here's the other stress seam that we were talking about. Again, if this is bondoed over, you know something was going on that wasn't good. And so I always try to see, and hopefully they have all 4 stress seams when you take a look at the car.
And as you mentioned, that battery tray can cause a lot of rust issues here on the driver's side,
Yes.
right?
Yep. Same thing here, stress seam here. This is more common because of the battery to rust on this side. But those are the major rust areas on the bottom section of the outer portion of the car.
So then let's take a look underneath the car here as well.
You bet. All right. Well, as we've talked, they are a unibody construction. So this is our pinch weld on the rocker panel. And coupes have 2 layers of metal and convertibles have 3. And so what we look for is we don't want to see swelling. These are excellent. If you look down them, you don't see a swelling. What happens is they swell and these pinch welds come apart. And as they split apart, then they start to flex. Well, guess what? It rusts, and when it flexes, it creates new shiny metal. What's new shiny metal do with moisture? It rusts again. So it's just a perpetual, as we say, rust never rests. It just continually works. These are excellent. You can see the 2 layers of on the pinch welds of the metal, and they're in excellent shape. So that's very important. And then next to that too, we'll see here, these are the torque boxes. They run from actually right here to here, and they are welded to the floor pans. And so these floor pans, this car is in excellent shape. These floor pans are original and in very good shape. These torque boxes are solid. We'll actually see torque boxes just crumble. They'll rust out and fall apart. If that falls apart, then the floor pan's connected to nothing solid. So we've lost a lot of our structural rigidity. So all these components come together. Now floor pans can be replaced, so it's probably, in my opinion, the least significant of the 3, from your rocker panels and the pinch welds to the torque boxes. So you can, I don't know why anyone ever came up with the invention of fiberglass floor pans, because you can't weld fiberglass to metal, and that's not going to give you any structural rigidity. So it's important that you have metal welded to metal to keep all these components strong and the car structurally safe. So those are essential. Pinch welds in the rockers, torque boxes, and then the floor pans thirdly. And then we also find commonly the bottom of the trunk. This one actually has had a little patch panel put in very nicely, but it's common. These will rust out as well. Obviously this isn't as big of a deal as the structural aspects, and they do make patch panels for it, but it's another common rust area underneath.
And as you said, these torque boxes carry a lot of the structural load of the car. The front suspension, for this unibody car, we've obviously got a subframe of sorts here with the front crossmember,
right,
to which the suspension is all attached, but that load gets transferred to and through the body through these torque boxes, or almost like subframe connectors on a Mustang or something that you might have.
Right.
Now, Greg's also got some other non-stock modifications that you might notice down here, like these plates to bolt in his roll cage. You won't see those on a stock car. and then obviously a lot of suspension modifications. But overall, this is actually a very kind of original, unmolested car under here, isn't it?
It is. It's in excellent shape. It was a good candidate to restore because it was structurally so sound.
Okay, now we're going to take a look at some of the issues that you would want to see when you're inspecting the outside kind of top portion of a late model Corvair. And we have a real treat. We have Keith Menard's beautiful Yenko Stinger to take a look at. So this is a gorgeous car and very rare, very valuable in the Corvair world. So, but the stuff we're going to look at here would apply to any late model coupe or really sedan, and in some cases convertible here as well, right?
Yes, definitely. So the first area I'd look at is right here under the windshield. It's very common, this section here and all the way across, it rusts out. We've even seen them so bad where inside the windshield in the car is actually gone. That metal underneath is gone, so it's separated. But this is a very, very common rust area on Corvairs. Again, they do make a patch panel to go across, but you'll see often a lot of these is slattered with Bondo. And that's a dead giveaway. It's had significant rust there. So that's probably one of the most primary ones. On some occasions, we've had the C-pillars, not nearly as much as the under the windshield, but we'll have some rust issues kind of mid-section for us that we've seen some rust area in there.
Another thing to note here, Keith's car being a Yenko Stinger has what they call the sail panel here. So a normal late model coupe would have window through this whole area as opposed to this sail panel. But the conversation is really the same about that C-pillar portion there.
Yes, correct. And then we want to look inside the door jambs. So there are a couple spots you want to look at. One would be up towards the front, right in here. This is common area to rust and rot. And that's obviously a very bad telltale sign of what's going on underneath. And so sometimes you'll see people slather them with Bondo as well. And if you see that, that's a red flag. Also towards the back of the door jamb, we sometimes can see some rust back in here in this section as well. Those are really common areas inside the jambs that you want to shy away from, especially if you can tell it's been doctored up.
Okay, so we're looking now at the engine compartment of this really nicely restored early model Lakewood, which is the station wagon body. This belongs to Eric. He got this car 6-year restoration project finished just 2 days before his graduation, so he's really excited about this car. We're going to take a look at the engine compartment to give you a sense of kind of what you're looking at in here.
This one in particular is not 100% original, as you mentioned, Armin. It is an original 80 horsepower station wagon engine. We did some upgrades. We threw the magnesium fan on this one, as opposed to the original steel fan. We did the internally regulated alternator. We also did an electric fuel pump, but we did put a dummy in. So this is actually a non-functional fuel pump, and we have an electric one that's hidden. Just for easier starting and whatnot. So
this brings up another really good point on Corvairs generally, which is just that in the modern era with ethanol-based fuels, the old mechanical fuel pumps that Corvairs used have just really not proven to be reliable. They fail, they just can't handle the modern ethanol, and unfortunately, even a lot of the reproductions that you can buy now also really can't handle it and will fail very quickly. So pretty much any Corvair person will tell you that an electric fuel pump is a great upgrade. And like you've got here set up, it's easy to make it look stock in the engine compartment and keep it nice and clean looking while still being drivable. And those fuel pumps represent a big risk as well, because when they fail, they tend to fail in a way that fills the crankcase with fuel, which is bad for a lot of things. Another common upgrade while we're here in the engine compartment would be the ignition. And this car also has a Pertronix igniter replacing the stock points system that would fire that distributor. And those Pertronix make a pretty nice upgrade just because it gives you a little more reliable timing signal and fewer parts to wear out and fail as well.
Yes, and no feeler gauges and all that. So yes,
easier
they're much
tune-ups.
simpler.
Yeah.
Yep. So those are some of the common upgrades that we do for customers is the internally regulated alternator, electric fuel pump. We're big proponents, not everyone is, but we are of those, especially because you don't drive them every day. So if they sit for a couple weeks, you turn the key, let it pressurize the system, pump it to the floor, and it usually starts right up. And then the electronic ignition. Another one that we encourage people to consider is a high torque starter. From our experience, the original starters, the Bendixes are a problem, solenoids can be, and a lot of the replacement parts are really cheap. And we find that they're almost as worn out as the worn out part we're trying to replace. So we really promote the high torque starter, which has been a really excellent replacement for us as well.
Now here's an engine that's partially torn down that we'll talk about just for reference. First of all, this is a 140 engine or 140 horsepower, recognizable immediately because of the fact that it has provisions for 4 individual one-barrel carburetors. These are actually cast into the head, for the intake manifold, so it's not a simple proposition to swap. You know, there's no intake manifold to swap over from a 4-carb engine to a 2-carb engine. As I mentioned, there's no water cooling to deal with, but Corvairs are air-cooled with a horizontal fan assembly. You can see here on top of the engine, which does mean that the cooling fan belt makes a 90-degree turn here to cool the motor. Now, for some folks, those fan belts can be challenging. It's a very simple system, but it is a little sensitive to having specific parts being in good condition. Namely, each of the fan pulleys needs to be clean, straight, and properly aligned. You need good alignment because that belt has to make kind of a tortured path to go around and down and through. And so you need the pulleys to be in decent shape and pointed, at each other in the correct direction. And the tension. So in general, my rule of thumb that I like to use, and I've heard from others as well, if you can still turn the alternator fan with your finger, but there's a fairly significant amount of resistance on it, that's about the right amount of belt tension. You can see this one also has an upgraded idler pulley over here. Sometimes those can help if you've been having any trouble with belts getting thrown off. And overall, you can really see one of the big advantages of the overall Corvair layout is a low center of gravity. As you saw on the motor that's stripped off, this is really just sheet metal sitting here on top of the motor for the air filter, to help guide cooling air down around the engine. The top of the engine, the heavy parts of the engine, is clear down here. It's lower than the frame rail here in the back of the car. So the weight distribution obviously is very biased towards the back of the car with the weight hanging out over the rear axle, but it's also very low down. So it adds to that excellent handling characteristic that these cars have. Another somewhat common Corvair little bugaboo is oil leaks. Obviously, there are a lot of areas that a car can leak from, Corvairs included, but a common one has always been the push rod tubes. This car has its lower shrouds removed, so it's easy to see. These are just sheet metal tubes, and the push rods go inside these. So we've got one camshaft buried down inside the block, and we've got push rods that ride off that cam to the rockers out in the head. And the tubes themselves are sealed in the head and in the block with an O-ring on each end. Those O-rings from the factory from GM back in the day were made out of a rubber that just couldn't handle the heat of a Corvair engine, and so they break down and leak a significant amount of oil. This is an easy fix. Viton is a very popular material now. It handles the heat a lot better, seals the pushrod tubes a lot better, and it's an easy fix to do even with the engine in the car. No big deal. Something else you want to think about with any classic car, obviously, or even non-classic cars, quite frankly, is whether or not you fit and can be comfortable in them. Now, the Corvair in general is actually quite roomy inside, but there can be a bit of a tight fit if you're a tall driver, so over 6 feet tall, especially if you've got long legs, because there's not necessarily a lot of fore and aft travel in the front seats. So, especially when you don't know where the seat lever is. For example, here I am, I'm not 6 feet tall, 5'10", somewhere around there. And in this case, I've got this seat pretty much all the way back, and I can still easily put the clutch all the way down and reach everything. So for taller drivers, especially longer legged ones, it can get a little bit snug. This is a really easy fix, a very common thing to do. Clark's makes some little seat extenders. It's very easy to make them out of some flat bar stock steel as well, but you can make some things that just relocate the mounting points for the seats back a couple of inches to get you that extra leg room. Or of course, there's always the aftermarket seat option as well. Now, one of the things that's a little different on Corvairs that can take a little getting used to for the uninitiated is actually, it's a very simple thing, but it's tire pressures. And it's something that probably led to some of the Corvairs' poor reputation early on. So the whole Corvair, depending on the model and year, only weighs maybe 2,600 pounds. In modern terms, extremely lightweight. And over 60% of that is on the back axle, which means there's very, very little weight in the front of the car. And if you run 30 PSI in your front tires, you'll find that they just don't grip the road, leading to sometimes, a lot of understeer and spooky handling from that standpoint, or not turning when you want them to turn. The simple fix is you should always run much lower front tire pressures in a Corvair than what you're running in the back. The rule of thumb is a 10 PSI differential between the back and the front. So if you're running 35 in the back, run 30 in the front. For a lot of years, I would run as low as 20 PSI in the front in mine, but it really depends on tire size, compounds, etc., as to what really works. The important thing is to expect a significant tire pressure differential between the back and the front. Another common question might be, how do I know what exactly I'm looking at as far as the model of this particular car? Can I trust the badges and that things haven't been swapped around and changed? Well, if you're not sure, look for the body tag. So we're here in the engine compartment, and the body tag is going to be here, or on some years you'll find it on this side. In this case, you'll see we've got a VIN plate over here as well. We won't cover all of the details of what exactly the body code identifiers mean, but there are plenty of ways online to decode body tag information. But this will tell you whether this car was originally a Corsa or a Monza and some other key elements of that. Then if I'm looking at one of these engines, what are some numbers I can look at to help me identify what the thing is that I'm looking at? Sure. Well, right there, you're down by the fuel pump and the alternator there. There's an engine code. So there'll be a date code, the first 4 digits, and then either 1 or 2 digits in the end will indicate what vehicle it came out of. For instance, this would have been a Powerglide 80 horsepower engine, and you'll see those last 2 digits, which is ZB on this one, would identify that. That's where you can check out the engine code. There's also a code on the cylinder heads too that will indicate, if it's a 102 or 80 horsepower or whatever it might be, so you can identify those, and they're easily accessible, those numbers, on the internet, so that you can identify the different components of your car. That's it for today. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned something. If you've got a tip you want to share with potential future prospective Corvair owners, drop it in the comments. If you've got questions, hit us up with those as well. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to my friend Chris Shade and Shade's Classic Cars for letting us hang out today, shoot a bunch of awesome cars, and we will see you next time.